Centuries after the Great Flood, the Nephilim giants reappeared on Earth as if nothing had happened. The question that has challenged theologians and scholars for millennia is a single one. How was this possible? If the flood was sent by God to purify the earth, why did the most corrupt beings return to walk among men? It was taught for centuries that the flood sent by God exterminated every corrupt being on the face of the earth. However, the Bible itself contradicts that narrative with a precision that is impossible to ignore. The Nephilim, those beings of colossal stature and supernatural origin, somehow survived the universal catastrophe. And what is even more disturbing is that they were seen again by humans centuries after the waters receded. What secret does the biblical narrative hide that religious tradition has not been able to explain clearly? The answer lies in three distinct theories, and one of them could change everything you thought you knew about the flood. Before exploring those theories, it is necessary to understand who the Nephilim were and why their existence matters so much. The term Nephilim appears in the book of Genesis with an economy of words that contrasts with its enormous significance. Some scholars translate the word Nephilim as those who fell or those who caused to fall, linking it to what is to come. Genesis 6:4 describes them as beings that inhabited the earth both before and after the flood. That detail, contained in just a single line of the sacred text, is actually one of the most explosive statements in the Bible. The Nephilim were the result of the union between the sons of God, identified as angels, and human women. From that forbidden union were born giants, renowned warriors, beings that filled those who beheld them with terror. And everything points to the fact that God sent the flood precisely to put an end to the corruption they represented. However, more than 500 years after the flood, the Nephilim reappeared in the biblical record. The episode takes place at one of the most critical moments in the history of the people of Israel, at the gates of Canaan. The Israelites, who had been enslaved in Egypt for 4 centuries, were finally marching toward the promised land. Moses then sent 12 men, one from each tribe, to secretly explore the territories they were to conquer. The episode is found in the book of Numbers, when the Israelites sent spies to explore the land of Canaan. Those 12 men returned terrified with a report that would change the fate of an entire town for 4 decades. Numbers 13:33 records the exact words of the spies. We saw there the Nephilim, descendants of Anak. And they added something that reveals the magnitude of what they contemplated. Compared to them, we looked like grasshoppers. That passage is neither a metaphor nor a literary exaggeration, but the testimony of 12 witnesses before an entire nation. 10 of the 12 spies returned convinced that the people of Israel could not face those giants and survive. Only Joshua and Caleb maintained their faith, but panic had already taken hold of the masses, and the damage was done. The giants were there, in Canaan, centuries after they were supposed to have been wiped from history by the flood. This raises a theological dilemma of great magnitude. Did God's plan fail, or is there something we do not understand well? Was the flood a divine failure, or are we misinterpreting the scope of that catastrophic event? To answer that question, there are 3 hypotheses developed by renowned scholars of the scriptures. Each of them comes from a different intellectual tradition and offers a different solution to the same enigma. None is definitive, but together they reveal the depth of the problem and the seriousness with which experts have addressed it. They agree that the Bible has no irreconcilable contradictions, but a mystery that needs to be understood. The first theory originates from a text that was not included in the biblical canon, the Apocryphon of Genesis. This document was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 20th century and dates back to the period before Christ. It relates something that, if true, would completely redefine the story of Noah and the very purpose of the flood. According to that text, Noah's own father doubted his son's paternity even before he was born. The father was anxiously reflecting on whether his wife's pregnancy was the result of an angel or the Nephilim themselves. The extraordinary appearance of the newborn, with white hair and luminous eyes, fueled those suspicions. That description is not casual. Rather, it reflects the belief that beings with angelic blood had unusual traits. The father then consulted the patriarch Enoch, who reassured him, but the doubt had been recorded forever. The mere possibility that someone would question Noah's human origin reveals how much that fear weighed in ancient thought. This suggests that some believed Noah might have had angelic ancestry, being partly Nephilim himself. If Noah carried that supernatural lineage in his blood, then the Nephilim never left the ark, because they were inside. And their descendants, even without knowing it, would have carried that lineage and passed it on to future generations. This hypothesis was formulated in the 1st century BCR, and many experts consider it an alternative narrative. It might not be the most probable explanation, but it shows that even in ancient times, people sensed something was wrong. Even the men of the past perceived the contradiction of the return of the Nephilim and sought to explain it. The second hypothesis is more solid and comes from the linguistic analysis of the biblical account of the flood itself. The scholar Michael Heiser, a doctor in biblical Hebrew and ancient Semitic languages, offers a revealing perspective. Heiser dedicated decades to the study of the supernatural background of the Old Testament from a rigorous academic perspective. His linguistic analysis of the Hebrew terms used in the flood narrative yields unexpected results. Genesis 7:19 states that the waters covered all the high mountains under the sky, an apparently total statement. However, Heiser argues that in biblical Hebrew, the word all does not always imply an absolute totality. Similarly, the word world in the scriptures does not necessarily refer to the entire planet as we understand it today. Genesis 41:57 itself provides a clarifying example when it says that all the earth went to Egypt to buy grain. It is evident that not every human being on all continents physically traveled to Egypt to acquire food. The expression all the earth referred to the known world of the characters in the story, not to the entire globe. Applying that same logic to the flood narrative, it is possible that the waters only covered the inhabited region described. More specifically, the world of the peoples and tribes mentioned in the Old Testament up to that narrative moment. If the flood was a regional event and not a planetary one, then the Nephilim living in other regions would have survived. That regional interpretation of the flood has both supporters and critics, and the academic debate continues to this day. Critics argue that if the flood was local, then God did not achieve his purpose of eradicating corruption. However, a question arises here that completely changes the approach to the problem and deserves to be considered carefully. Was the real purpose of the flood to exterminate every Nephilim on the face of the earth without leaving any trace? Or was it simply about putting an end to the rebellion, protecting humanity, and delivering a decisive blow to that threat? If the goal was to protect humanity from the corruption that the Nephilim generated, the flood more than fulfilled that purpose. Most were destroyed. The rebellion was crushed, and the scattered survivors no longer posed an immediate threat. From Noah's perspective inside the ark, the water reached as far as his eyes could see in all directions. For him, everything was submerged, because everything he could observe from his position was indeed underwater. I had no maps, no global geographical references, and no way of knowing what was happening thousands of kilometers away. What was happening in distant and unknown continents was simply invisible and irrelevant to the occupants of the Ark. This narrative perspective would explain how the text can be true without necessarily implying a planetary flood. The honesty of the biblical narrative may lie precisely in that it recounts events from the limited perspective of its protagonists. But it is the third theory that is the most surprising, because it arises from a passage about something completely different. No one reading the text for the first time would expect to find in that passage a clue about the return of the Nephilim. The Apostle Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, talks about the custom of women covering their heads. In chapter 11, verse 10, Paul provides a reason for that practice which has puzzled interpreters for centuries. He says that the woman should have a sign of authority on her head, and adds a reason that seems out of place for the angels. What do angels have to do with the use of veils or head coverings during religious worship? To find the answer, it is necessary to refer to one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, known as the Damascus document. That text, dated to the period of the Second Temple, speaks of angels called Watchers, who fell for desiring women. Their descendants, described as tall as cedars and with bodies as immense as mountains, are the Nephilim. The Damascus document suggests that this pattern, angels seduced by human women, was repeated after the flood. Academic Troy Martin from Xavier University provides a linguistic interpretation that connects this entire puzzle. According to Martin, the Greek term used by Paul for covering can also be interpreted as what covers or envelops. In ancient medical thought, documented by Hippocrates, Aristotle, and Tertullian, long hair had a special significance. Those authors believed that long hair was an extension of the female reproductive system, a prolongation of fertility. If a woman let her hair down while bowing her head in prayer, it was believed that this could awaken desire in the angels. Pablo, in writing about the veils, was actually making a direct reference to Genesis 6:4 and the fall of the Watchers. I was warning the women of Corinth that certain practices could attract the unwanted attention of fallen spiritual beings. That warning implies that Pablo believed that fallen angels were still active and present in the world of his time, not as a historical threat that has been overcome, but as a spiritual reality with which believers must remain cautious. That third theory, known as the repopulation theory, holds that the fallen angels acted again after the flood. The same Watchers, or beings similar to them, united again with human women and begot a new generation of Nephilim. This would explain why the giants reappeared in Canaan centuries after the waters of the flood receded. The Bible does not explicitly confirm it in a single passage, but multiple texts point in that same direction. The Damascus document, the letters of Paul, and the book of Genesis together form a coherent and disturbing picture. The angels did not learn the lesson from the flood, or they simply chose to ignore it and repeat the forbidden act. And the result was the reappearance of the Nephilim in the Promised Land, exactly when the Israelites were arriving to claim it. That encounter between the Israeli spies and the giants of Canaan was neither a narrative accident nor a mere literary device. It was the reflection of a spiritual war, much older and deeper, that began before the first human being existed. The three hypotheses, that of the Nephilim in the Ark, the regional flood, and the angelic repopulation, each have their strengths. None of them can be completely dismissed in light of the available texts, and each one sheds light on a different angle. The first is dramatic but unlikely. The second is linguistically coherent but theologically uncomfortable for many. The third is the one that best fits with the set of textual evidence scattered throughout ancient writings and sources. It is certain that the Bible confirms the return of the Nephilim, but does not give a direct explanation for it. That silence of the sacred text has been a source of debates, studies, and fascination from biblical times to the present. It is not a mistake or a careless omission, but perhaps an invitation to delve into the texts with more rigor. And the story of the Nephilim does not end with their reappearance in Canaan, or with the victory of the Israelites over the giants. The narrative of those colossal beings of supernatural origin continues to unfold throughout the entire Old Testament. Each battle, each conquest, each confrontation between Israel and the giant peoples is part of a larger conflict. A conflict that, according to some interpretations, culminates in a definitive confrontation with a figure who would change history. The Nephilim, those beings who survived the greatest cataclysm in human history, left an indelible mark. In the sacred texts, in the traditions of ancient peoples, and in the mysteries that scholars still try to solve today. The question is not just how they survived the flood, but what role they played in the great narrative of humanity and the divine. And the answer could reveal something about human origins that no religious tradition has stated with full clarity. The apocryphal texts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the writings of Paul together form a map of the same territory. A territory inhabited by beings that existed on the border between the human and the divine, between the visible and the invisible. That border, according to the oldest texts, was not destroyed by the flood, but simply redrawn in another location. The Watchers of the Sky, as they are called in the Qumran manuscripts, did not cease to exist when the waters rose. They continued observing, waiting, and according to some sources, acting upon the human world in ways that the Bible hints at. The Book of Enoch, although not canonical, is cited in the very Epistle of Jude, which gives it an authority that is hard to ignore. The text describes in detail the process by which the Watchers made the decision to descend and join the women. And it is narrated how that decision was irreversible, sealing the fate of those angels and their gigantic descendants. But if the decision was irreversible for the original Watchers, what prevented other angels from making the same choice? Nothing. According to the theory of repopulation, nothing except the divine will that Paul seemed to want to protect with his advice. That is why I recommended to the women of Corinth that they cover themselves, not for cultural modesty, but for a deep spiritual reason. He was warning about a threat that, according to his worldview, remained real and present in the world of his time. That continuity between the ancient biblical world and the world of the New Testament is precisely what makes this story unique. The Nephilim are not just an exotic element of the book of Genesis, but a narrative thread that runs throughout the entire Bible. From Genesis to the prophets, from the Psalms to the apostolic letters, its shadow is cast in various ways. King Og of Bashan, mentioned in Deuteronomy, was the last of the Rephaim, another name linked to the lineage of giants. Goliath, the Philistine warrior brought down by David, belonged, according to the scriptures, to a family of giants in Gath. Each of those figures is an echo of the original Nephilim, a remnant of that lineage that the flood did not manage to extinguish. And each victory of Israel over those giants has a meaning that goes beyond the military history of an ancient people. They are battles in a deeper conflict that began in the heavens and manifested on earth through generations. That conflict has its own rules, its own actors, and its own logic. that the biblical narrative gradually reveals. As the centuries progress and the books of the Old Testament follow one another, the pattern becomes increasingly visible. Giants always appear on the path of the chosen people, as if their presence obeyed a higher purpose. A conflict that, according to the boldest interpretations of the sacred texts, has not yet reached its final conclusion. The story of the Nephilim is, at its core, the story of a violated boundary and the consequences that violation produced. It is the story of what happens when the cosmic order is challenged and the consequences of that challenge propagate through time. It is also a reminder that sacred texts hold layers of meaning that go far beyond superficial reading. And it is also the story of a God who responded to that challenge with the most powerful instrument at his disposal, the flood. But if the Nephilim have returned, then the battle did not end with the waters, and the story continues to unfold before us. What the flood could not extinguish definitively raises a question that no generation has been able to ignore completely. Is there still any presence of that lineage in the world? Or did its story finally come to an end with the passage of the centuries? That story has a final chapter that most Bible readers never connect with the giants of Genesis. A chapter that involves a figure spoken of with increasing intensity in both the Old and New Testaments. A chapter in which the Nephilim ceased to be the protagonists and became the backdrop for something greater. The Nephilim, those beings who defied the divine order before the flood and did so again afterward, had an end. And that ending did not come from another flood or another natural disaster, but in a way that no Nephilim could have anticipated. There is something profoundly unsettling about the idea that these beings, born from the most extreme transgression, had a destiny. A destiny that, according to the texts, was designed before the first angel made the terrible decision to descend. The complete story of the Nephilim is one of the most fascinating, disturbing, and forgotten narratives in the entire Bible. If you've come this far, you realize we've only scratched the surface, and there's so much more to explore and understand. If you want to know how the story of the Nephilim ends and what it has to do with the greatest